Hey, Ted Morrissey here
Attention Milwaukee North Line passengers
at
awaiting
Union
a
Station. Hang
3:35
on.
departure to Deerfield.
Yeah, here at Union Station in Chicago. It's a busy place, but I got a couple hours for my train leaves. I just got back from day two of the American Literature Association conference here, and I just wanted to share some thoughts, some observations. I went to some cool panels today. Went to a couple of panels that were focused on the poet Wallace Stevens, but particularly his relationship with Poetry Magazine, which was based in, still is based in Chicago. And it was really cool because the presenters looked at, archival copies of the journal Poetry going back to the early part of the 20th century when it was founded. And really, for me, it just kind of emphasizes the importance of literary journals. Now, at one point, literary journals could launch careers of writers and poets. In fact, one of the things they talked about was one of the poets who was originally published in poetry eventually started having a wider audience and being published in more popular magazines, and that sort of put her on the outside of the really serious poets who did not consider, that kind of poetry to be worth reading and so forth. But it also emphasized the fact that even back then, poets could be paid lots and lots of money, the equivalent of thousands of dollars for poems. And of course, I've talked before about short story writers being able to make great livings as writers. When nowadays that's pretty much not the case, right? Um, Now there's all the great writing that's going on today is going on in literary journals. The great stories, poems, creative nonfiction, thousands and thousands of pieces being published probably every day, certainly every month, and yet it goes largely unread, even by the kind of people who would be interested in reading it. They either are, blissfully unaware that it's even out there, or they just don't really have good, easy access to those journals. Um, and it's just so hard nowadays to get a sort of readership. Um, that's one of the reasons why in our podcast, A Lesson Before Writing, my co-hosts and I do a featured short story every episode from a literary journal that's been published pretty recently. Sometimes we go back a year or two, but usually it's pretty within the last few months. Trying to do what we can to at least focus a little bit of attention on some of the really great writing that's going on. Because I had this observation. So this was the 35th annual conference. And I've only been to a couple of American Literature Association conferences. I went to one in Boston a few years ago. They're terrific. I mean, I love them. They're great stuff. But I also had this idea that if you went through the program and looked at all the different panels and the writers who were being discussed and so forth, and I'll bet if you went back to the first conference 35 years ago, if maybe that program is available, archived somewhere. I'll bet if you went through it, you would find, I don't know, I'm just going to make up a number here, but 80%, 90% of the same authors being talked about. So in that first conference 35 years ago, I'm sure there were panels on Poe and on Hawthorne and on Emily Dickinson and on Robert Frost and on and on and on. And those writers are still being talked about now. It's almost as if there's been nothing worth reading and analyzing and doing scholarship about in the last 35 years. But obviously, that's not true. There are great short stories, great poems, great novels, great plays, great everything being written all the time now, but it just doesn't really land on anybody's radar. Once in a while at these conferences, very, very contemporary author will be the focus of someone's paper, but pretty unusual. I noticed this time around there was a presentation by the Bonnie Joe
Attention
Campbell
Milwaukee
Society.
North Line
Hold
passengers
on.
awaiting your 3:35 departure to
So the Bonnie Joe Campbell Society. Bonnie Joe is alive and well. We're friends. She may not know that. No, we met and talked when she came to town to a reading a few years ago. And we've been Facebook friends ever since. Again, if you asked her, out of the blue, especially maybe when she first woke up in the morning, if she knows Ted Morrissey, she may deny it. Even people who do know me deny it. So whatever. But obviously, then a living writer with their own society, that's pretty unusual. So anyway, again, it just is really kind of speaks to the state of play here when scholars today are still focusing, you know, most of their attention on long gone writers, right? And the same writers that were being focused on 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago in many cases, right? Now, maybe offering new perspectives on them, and that's cool. But again, they,
four-door passengers, you're 350.
anyway, it'd be nice if more people were reading contemporary fiction, poetry, etc., and actually reading it in a serious kind of way and doing presentations on it. Now, one of the presentations that I went to, in fact, just the last one before I left the hotel and started trucking over here to Union Station, is it was a panel looking at. Hang on, I got to make sure I'm doing this right. Sorry, it was looking at a trilogy of films by. I'll get it here. Bear with me. There we go. Mike Flanagan. I couldn't remember the writer director's name. American Gothic revisited Mike Flanagan's adaptations of Poe, James, and Jackson. And so, three different scholars doing three different presentations looking at those three Gothic adaptations by the same director. And that was really interesting. I mean, obviously, that's very contemporary because those are series that have been on Netflix just the last few years. And each scholar kind of weighed in on how much.
Attention to walking offline passengers when you're.
This maybe was a really bad idea. But anyway, and in the process, talked about. The original stories, the original Fall of the House of Usher, the original Turn of the Screw by Henry James, the original Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And through the discussion of those original texts, it kind of emphasized to me something that we've talked about before, I've talked about before, is my preference and a lot of writers' preferences and a lot of readers' preferences for ambiguous endings. And in particular, that came up with talking about the Turn of the Screw, where the whole story is ambiguous. It's not really clear what's going on in it, but certainly the end of the story is very wide open. I bet this is kind of funny. Yeah, the importance of ambiguity.
The track reminds passengers to get a grip when moving about the train. For your safety and stability, please hold on to red and white poles, handrails, luggage racks, seat backs, tables, and counters.
This has turned into a very postmodern video. Yeah, my idol William Gass. I read just recently a quote of his that said that all endings should be unsatisfactory. In other words, they should all be open ended. They shouldn't tie up too many loose knots, that kind of thing. All right. Yeah, maybe I'll kind of close with that.
Attention to walking offline passengers.
Yeah, I think I will.